I'm taking you deep into the blazing heart of the Australian outback, over 1,000 kilometers from the city to a town so remote, even Google Maps told me to turn back. But all of it was leading somewhere special. My destination? This place, Broken Hill, a mining town tucked between desert plains and endless train tracks, famous for silver, sun-scorched roads, and believe it or not, the Mad Max 2 Museum. Yeah, this is the strange outback. But I wasn't here for movies. I came chasing a forgotten story. I came to find one of the oldest surviving mosques in regional Australia, a place built not by settlers or missionaries, but by Muslim Kamilis who helped shape this land's early backbone. These were Muslims who crossed oceans, deserts, and cultures. Their footprints shaped this country, but their stories are rarely acknowledged. Why? What happened to them? These were the questions I found myself facing as I uncovered their story. But at the heart of it all was something more personal. What does it truly mean to be Muslim in this land? To walk the same roads they once traveled? To stand where they once prayed in a land they helped shape, but were rarely seen as part of? So come with me as we journey into a town few have heard of, to rediscover a part of Australian history that's almost faded away. Before I could even start this journey, I had one big question. Who were the Kamilis? I wanted to know who they really were, what they believed in, what drove them. Because these weren't just workers carting goods across the desert. They were Muslims, men of faith, men who literally helped build this country. And somehow, we forgot them. After reading upon them for a while, I couldn't help but to say, wow. Turns out, they were brought in to do the jobs nobody else wanted. Trekking across the centre of Australia, where the land was so dry, it cracked open underfoot, where horses dropped dead. And somehow, just somehow, the Kamilis just kept going. The problem is, their story barely made it into our history books. So I packed my bags and headed to the outback, to a little desert town that still holds the traces of what they left behind. And a short drive later, the 13 hours on the road came to an end. I arrived at Broken Hill Mosque. I am here now, the Kamilis were here then, and somewhere between those two timelines, something had been lost, and I was hoping to find out. Here is where I met Gary, the unlikely keeper of the oldest regional mosque in Australia. He's been volunteering here for a couple of years now. He's a true local, Aussie through and through. And while he's not the guide you might anticipate at a mosque like this, it's clear that he cares about the history, the stories, and making sure none of it gets lost.
So the Kamilis came in through South Australia, through Port Augusta. Over here, they connected up with the Darling River. So the paddle steamers had come up the Darling. They'd bring supplies for the various different stations. The Kamilis would pick it up at all the different port towns. So all those towns along the Darling are actually port towns. They'd take the goods into the stations and then bring the produce back to the paddle steamers and then off to market. Here, that away you're going to South Australia, 50 kilometres only. That away you're heading up to Queensland. So they'd come in from South Australia and head up that road and go into southwest Queensland as well. They were stunning people. They were so strong. And they didn't ride their camels often. They'd do the walking because the camel had to carry all the baggage. Yeah. You've got to realise that a lot of them obviously were tribal. So when they came to Australia, they had a sense of protocol when they moved into Aboriginal country. So the Aboriginal people really appreciated the fact that they were treated with respect. So there was a lot of intermarriage. When I say a lot, there were strict colonial rules against it. One couple had to flee from an Aboriginal and Aboriginal woman, Islamic man, had to flee through South Australia to get away from the West Australian police because it was forbidden. So interracial rather than interfaith.
And then Gary told me something else, something that flipped the timeline completely. Before the Cameleers ever crossed the deserts, Muslim Makassan traders were already here, sailing from Indonesia centuries earlier, trading and praying. The Cameleers carried Islam through the desert, but the Makassans brought it here first, arriving by sea generations before.
The Makassans, so they came from Sulawesi, from Indonesia. They were Muslim, and there's actually Islamic words in the Yolngu language, and some of their dances and stuff seem to indicate ties, and there's actual Aboriginal people who were taken back to Sulawesi. So there was a strong connection. What they were after was bêche de mer, sea slugs, and there was a huge trade with the Chinese. So they used to come every year at the appropriate season and interacted freely with the Aboriginal people up north. So that's the first contact, interfaith contact, if you like. But then the ones that came through South Australia. So this is the last Imam's walking stick. So that's probably one of the older ones. And that is he. That's part of a pack saddle, and there'd be two of them, one at the front of the hump, one at the back, and then they'd string it together with sticks and then build up. Of course, they had to, every night, unload the camels, let them forage, and then find them in the morning, so that's why they needed bells. And next to the bells are nose pegs. So they're attached to a very sensitive part of the nose. And we talk about string of camels. It's literally a string that connects them. Because if the string doesn't break and the animal moves suddenly, that peg will get pulled out of the nose and it'll get infected.
And it was here that Brother Abu Bakr, a researcher of Australia's early Muslim presence, introduced me to one of the rarest surviving artifacts.
So we have here this rather unassuming little manuscript. It was the first identified handwritten Cameleer manuscript, one of only 3 known to exist in Australia. It's hoped that more come to light. This particular manuscript here is an ijaza, a permission and recognition of the recipient of becoming a Qadriya Sufi Sheikh. There are 2 here, one which is extremely damaged. It contains 3 books which look to have been rebound at some point in time. So there's the ijaza, and the second one that's here contains some prayers, some sort of what's called a falnama for understanding omens based on the Quran, and a large supplication, Dua Kanz al-Arsh, the supplication of the mighty throne, which is quite prevalent throughout South Asia. All 3 Cameleer manuscripts have affiliations with the Qadriya Sufi order, the oldest Sufi order in the history of Islam. The Qadriya Sufi order has a place of prominence within the history of Sufism in Australia, partly because of the Makassans who engaged with Australia's Indigenous people along the top end. A lot of those were Qadriya, and then amongst the Cameleers, it's the only, or the most prevalent Sufi order amongst the Cameleers that we've identified to date.
I had followed the paths of camels across deserts, listened to stories of people forced to flee, of love that crossed lines the law refused to accept. I'd heard how respect was shown to Aboriginal land and how faith was carried through. What stays with me is how easily all of this could have faded away, simply through being overlooked. If no one had taken the time to care for it, this story might have quietly slipped away. Standing here now, it's clear that this mosque is still around because people chose to hold on to it.
That there is one of the original Cameleers prayer mats.
This one right
Yeah,
Wow.
right? And very simple, the direction to Mecca.
And how old would this be then?
So, as I said, from 1893, mainly until the 1920s when lorries took over. Isn't that stunning?
Amazing.
The oldest mosque in Australia, functioning mosque at the moment, is in Adelaide in Little Gilbert Street. This is the oldest outback mosque still existent. There were 3 different mosques in Maree, but all of those have disappeared, and the one that's there at the moment is just a recreation. It's basically there for tourists, it's not consecrated. So this is the oldest functioning outback mosque.
What year was it established in?
1893, I believe. So the Cameliers were already well established in South Australia by then. When Broken Hill opened up, they just sort of started to supply things to Broken Hill as well, and further north.
And this was established by the Afghan Cameliers that came here originally?
I personally don't like using the word Afghan because we're talking pre-partition and we're talking a whole northwest India, what's now Pakistan, Afghanistan, Baluchistan, as far as Persia, Iran. So just to label them all as Afghans is a bit of a mistake, although it was predominantly Afghani people that went to this mosque, and it was mainly the Punjabi Indians that were at the other mosque. I get people that come over for just a weekend visit. So a minibus of people from Sydney or Melbourne or Canberra, they come in, they do their call to prayer, they do the prayers, and it brings this place alive. It's just absolutely wonderful.
Do you have perhaps a particular fond memory of this place?
Probably the best moment was when I met the great-grandson of the actual last imam here. And I was telling, as I was told, that the little mosque used to be the house for this imam. He said, "Come on, Gary." He had 14 children. You couldn't live in that with 14 children.
Outside the mosque, Broken Hill carries on like any other outback town. The Muslim community here remains, still connected, still gathering, shaped by work that was hard, and lives that were rarely simple. Each Friday, people make their way to the mosque for Jummah, continuing a rhythm that began long before this town was even fully formed. The journeys are shorter now. The camels are long gone, but the purpose remains the same. Faith didn't pass through Broken Hill. It stayed, and week by week, it is still carried forward.